Hello, everyone, and welcome back to one of these interview episodes of the SWW show. I'm Mike, and today with me a special guest to talk about, honestly, a genre we don't talk about enough in games. So to get us started, do you mind introducing yourself and the game we're here to talk about?
Certainly. So my name's Richard Smith. I'm here to talk about the game I'm currently working on called Supersonic Fight, which is a combat flight simulator, to use the term that was kind of coined in the 90s, I would say. It's going to support VR. It's going to be on the PC, and maybe down the line it'll be on consoles, but that's a bit a long way off yet. Yeah, and it's kind of a passion project. I've been working on it for 3 years so far, and still got a long way to go.
I was gonna say it's interesting because like obviously you think like you just referenced like nice, right? Obviously that's kind of, I would argue, like the heyday of the popularity of this genre, but obviously we've seen a lot of like flight sims in recent years, especially like Microsoft flight sim and stuff kind of hit the mainstream kind of again. Is this like a genre that you grew up with wanting to kind of do things in? Kind of what drew you to kind of make a game in this like very, let's be honest, intense genre?
So I assumed you would ask a question along those lines, and I was thinking back to how exactly this happened. So when I was very young, I'm talking 6 or 7 years old, I desperately wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to join the RAF. I wanted to fly jets. That's all I wanted to do. And I've even got books that my parents bought me back then, because of how much I was into it. And then, unfortunately, at 8 years old, I was diagnosed type 1 diabetic, and I was told that there was no way I could be a pilot in the RAF. So obviously, I was a bit gutted about that. But around the same time, my dad bought us, as a family, he bought us a Commodore 64. Now, at that age, I had no idea what that was. But over the next few years, I started to just, spend all my time, all my free time when I wasn't at school playing games on this thing. And that's when I discovered these very primitive but very exciting flight simulators. And then fast forward to 1989, and I have a very vivid memory of being in the car with a magazine that I'd bought, and in it was a preview of a game that was coming out on the Commodore Amiga called FA18 Interceptor. And the graphics were, for the time, just mind blowing. I'd never seen anything like it. And I knew then I had to have that. So I pestered my parents for pretty much most of a year. And I think in order just to get me to shut up, they agreed that for the next 3 birthdays and 3 Christmases combined, they would get me this Amiga 500. And in 1989, they got me the Batman pack, the A500 Batman pack, which, interestingly enough, came with F-18 Interceptor. And yeah, I played that game like so many others. I played it to absolute death. And then there were other games around. Again, as you said, it was the 90s was definitely, in my opinion, that was the sort of the heyday of these sorts of things. There was Gunship, another Microprose game. There was F-15 Strike Eagle. There was F-19 Stealth Fighter, and I mean there were loads of others. Those are the ones that stick in my mind. But I didn't set out to make a flight simulator. Although, sorry to segue again, I do remember in computer science class at school. This would have been, I'd have been about 15. You were allowed to do a project, and you were supposed to do something simple, something that was, relatively.
These simple projects are always the way to tell who's gonna end up in these career fields, because the ones who don't do simples, are like the stories you're about to tell, I feel like, are the ones who always been like, and now I had a long career doing this.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I decided in my naivety I said, oh, I'm going to make a flight simulator. I mean, of course, I failed hugely, but I learned so much because I remember trying to move the world around the camera. This was running code that was on a BBC micro back then. That's when it was. But I mean, I absolutely loved it. Another story, just quickly, since I mentioned it. Um, I when I so over here we have GCSEs. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, my monitors went to sleep, and I was worried it just gonna lose you. So over here we have GCSEs, and then you have A levels. And for A levels, having done GCSE computer science, I wanted to do A level computer science, and I didn't find out till years later. My parents had gone in for like an open evening, whatever you call it, and they had been told I wasn't allowed to do computer science. And of course, I find this out years later, and I was like, what do you mean? Why wasn't I allowed to do it? And this is going to sound so big-headed, and I apologize in advance. They were told, and I quote, "We can't teach him anything."
That's
And
amazing.
I just think, and I just think, wait, so I could have got a subject that I would have easily gotten an A in, and I wasn't allowed to do it. And instead, I had to do economics, and I hated economics, and I only got a B in that. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Um, so yeah, so I didn't set out to make a flight simulator initially. So I worked at Codemasters, I worked at Rebellion, worked with my friend that I'd met at Codemasters. We did that for years, and then I finally got to the point where I was going to do a project of my own choosing, and I was actually working on a VR sort of, I don't know how to describe it, a VR experience where you could just do random stuff. You know, you could, yes, you could do like the GTA, you could get in cars, you could go, shooting range, all that sort of thing, but just anything. I thought if there's anything I think of, I'll put it in there. And I was working on the VR controller for it, as in, the mobility moving around the world. And I was testing my code that let you sort of say, right, I'm currently here, I want to sit down in that seat. And I did it, and I had it for a seat, I had it for a car, and I thought, oh, I'll bring in an aircraft. And I just happened to have a model that I'd bought on CG Trader lying around. I bought it in the sale, and it happened to be an F-18 Hornet. And I brought that in. And I thought, great, I'll set it up so I can sit in it. And this was the catalyst. This was the seed where I was thinking, oh, this F-18 looks awesome. And then, of course, I was thinking of F-18 Interceptor on the Amiga. I thought, why has no one made a game like that? And I was well aware at that time that you've got your Ace Combats, which is sort of the arcadey end of the spectrum, and you've got your DCS, which is the insanely realistic, I mean, to the point where you have to read the manual to figure out how to fly the plane type thing. And sure, you've got Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is kind of a happy medium between the two, but certainly I'd say more serious. And I just thought, where are the games like the ones I used to play on the Amiga, where you could pick up and play, and it had the depth, but you didn't have to read the manual to learn how to fly. And that was literally it. That was 3 years ago, and I started drafting an idea for a game, and that became Supersonic Fight, and here we are.
That's wild. So a little context. So the way I found you definitely was like I saw like you were listed as like a VR game too, right? And
Yes.
and I'm kind of curious. Obviously, you decided to start with this thing, and it started inherently with like a model that was obviously not built for it, that you had a computer and kind of evolved from there. How are you kind of balancing, I guess, the like flight control part for people? Kind of like, so VR, obviously you could almost like grab the stick with like your bare hands and kind of
Yep.
deal with that. Like, how are you almost handling that for like everyone else, I guess, kind of? Or is it just like you have to go in and just like fly this, like you'd fly like a real thing, is kind of your view?
So I've got my plan. So in terms of sort of control and how we will interact with the game, on the one hand, I want to offer as many options as possible because I know obviously everyone has their own opinions. I mean, I've played flight simulators and I cannot get to grips with playing it with keyboard and mouse, but I know some people love that. That's how they play them. I mean, I've got a selection of. I always say HOTAS. I apologize. I don't know the correct pronunciation. Is it HOTAS? Hands-on throttle and stick. I've got some joysticks and throttles, and obviously that gives you that proper immersion. You feel like it's a bit more realistic. I don't like VR games where you virtually grab the stick and your hand, there's no resistance, but I know that some people do like that, so I will certainly offer that option. But in my mind, the way I envision Supersonic Fight hopefully being played, because it's running on the PC, you can start it up, and I like the idea that when you put the headset on, that is you putting on your helmet in the cockpit. So in my mind, you would have your joystick and your throttle, and you'd be grabbing those, and it would, again, just trying to make that level of immersion. But I will still offer the ability to play via controller, Xbox controller, PlayStation controller, and, as I say, keyboard and mouse. So, but I want to sort of make it as accessible as possible, because we all like to play things differently, and obviously I'll support all the different things like what's it called, the eye tracker. I've got I bought one. It's sitting behind me somewhere. I've got to set it up at some point. But yeah, I want it to be as sort of open and inviting to people. So people who are like, oh, I only play flight simulators if I get to use this and this and that and so on. But at the same time, it needs to be pick up and play. You just, anyone can just. I don't want there to be that barrier to entry at all.
So what is your kind of your view on almost I guess obviously flight controls is very interesting. Another is like performancey, right? So obviously VR is very intense. Flight sims can be
Yes.
very intense. What's kind of your thought process of like level, I guess, of simulation versus like arcadey to like get performance you kind of willing to kind of think about here?
Mm. So here's the thing. So when I first started drafting the idea for Supersonic Fight, I even in my design document, I even wrote that, oh, maybe it will be something that can run on a Quest 4, thinking that, the logical progression of the performance of the Quest 2, Quest 3, Quest 4. But in all honesty, I don't think it would. The game I'm writing definitely won't be able to squeeze onto a Quest 4. Maybe I could do it like a cut down version of it, but that's not my focus. My focus is to make a PC game that supports a VR headset, so you can plug in your Quest or your Index or whatever. I say Index. I mean, I've got an Index somewhere which I haven't used in so long. I mean, VR with base stations is so now old. I haven't used one of those for so long. But yeah, so as to answer your question, I'm making a PC sim, which obviously yes will hopefully look great. Will support VR, so yes, obviously you've got to render everything twice, and you've got to take that into account. Um, but with regards to the sort of the accuracy of the simulation side, the physics and so on, I spent a long time. I would say out of the 3 years I've been working on this so far, the longest period I spent was on the aerodynamics. I bought so many books on flight physics and how flaps work, the different types of flaps, all this sort of stuff. And it was a bit of a it was a heck of a learning curve, I must admit. But it was also, I love that. I love the idea of, even at my age, I'm still like something I don't know enough about or scares me, and I just love to just throw myself into it and read what I can, find out what other people do, and so on. And so I implemented my flight model that I've got, and I'm happy that it is very much based on physically accurate stuff, but at the same time, it's not so intense that it's going to just eat your frame rate up. So again, it's yeah. So exactly as you said, I need to get that balance of this feels like it's realistic, but it's not so realistic that I need to have the absolute latest PC with the fastest CPU and the fastest graphics card to be able to run it. In fact, my for me the sort of the benchmark of what I want my game to run smoothly on the Steam Deck. So that will kind of be my what do you call it, minimum spec device to test on. And then obviously to support VR, I've just got to make sure that I optimize it, and where necessary, I'm going to have to pull down some of the graphics. So, for example, the thing I'm working on at the moment is the volumetric clouds. So obviously, I need to make sure they can be toned down so that I can support VR and still hit the necessary frame rate.
That's yeah, no, that's it's a fun challenge always when you're trying to think of this like schism of devices. So
Mm.
I'm curious. So obviously, as you said too, right? You're hopping in. You're kind of going the background story. I'm actually kind of curious about a little bit. So back on your Steam page, I saw so it sets takes place in like the '90s. You're in the San Fran Peninsula. Is kind of your start. Kind of where did this kind of come from? This idea of like the story and backdrop for the game.
Oh, okay, so yeah, so what I'm doing is I am making a spiritual sequel to F-18 Interceptor. So that story about the 90s, that is actually the storyline of FA-18 Interceptor, which was on the Amiga. Always say it's on the Amiga, but it was also released on DOS as well, and it wasn't just the Amiga game. And that was set, and in that game, there wasn't a lot of story because obviously back then story wasn't the focus because of things was everything was so new that people just were like, "Whoa, this looks amazing." But the storyline and the gist of it was that an unknown enemy was attacking San Francisco. You, as a lone pilot, could fly either the F-18 or the F-16, and you had about I think there were about six or seven missions, and it was things like dogfight or intercept cruise missiles or destroy an enemy ship, all this sort of things. And of course, and it was so fun and exciting and cool. And as I say, perhaps it was the mind blowing graphics that we didn't. I'm speaking like I know what everyone else thought, but I feel like we didn't care so much because it was just the freedom and the scope of the game was so huge. But we just loved that we could fly this thing that I mean the number of polygons in that F-18 was probably 100 if that or something like that. but it didn't matter. We were flying it. We'd fly it under the Golden Gate Bridge. We'd fly it around the Bay Area. You know, you'd fly, and there were little things that at the time I'd never been to San Francisco back then, so I didn't know that there was this famous tower called Sutro Tower, and I just remember thinking, oh, there's some very strange red and white wireframe object on the land there, and now obviously I understand what it all was. But yeah, so that I'm written a story where I'm writing it as if, well, if that if that took place in the 90s, what could have happened in that world that they created? I say they, I think it was a guy called Bob Dinnerman or Robert Dinnerman, and he made this game, and I'm kind of sort of adapting my idea of, well, what could happen and what could happen now, and so that's what I've done.
That sound that's that's great. So I'm kind of so I guess here's the context because I was curious. Obviously, you base this obviously inspiration on like a game, kind of your kind of experience of, and obviously as you said, you weren't able to be a, like a pilot or anything. How are you kind of like while going through this process of development then making sure this I guess feels right? Like do you have like friends who are pilots and okay you kind of haven't tried this? Is it just your logic is like if this feels like I'm flying it feels right kind of, or what's your kind of like end mythos of like the end goal being realism versus the end goal being what people think this should feel like?
Mm. So thankfully, on my Discord, I've gathered a few. I say gathered. I have been lucky enough to be joined by a few people who are absolutely mental when it comes to flight sims. You know, they live and breathe them. And it turns out one of the guys who joined the Discord, he is an Australian Air Force pilot who actually flies F-18s. And I asked him, I said, "Oh, would you be willing to play my game at various stages and give me feedback?" To which he very kindly agreed. But that obviously I one person's opinion, obviously the opinion of someone who actually flies these aircraft is invaluable. In fact, I even contacted. I don't know if you're familiar with a guy on YouTube called Mover, CW Lemoyne. So he's a very popular. Right. So I contacted him and I asked him, would he be able to help me? And he said, unfortunately, because of the rules regarding military personnel potentially giving away any information about American, what do you call it, aircraft and stuff, that's obviously protected. He said he wouldn't be allowed to do it. And I said, oh, no problem. But, I was obviously very grateful that he even replied. So, yeah, so I will be asking pilots for their feedback. I've been reading as many books as I can find by pilots. So, for example, on my desk right now, I've got a book that I just arrived called Lead Solo: Learning Life's Vectors from an FA-18 Blue Angel Aviator by Frank Weiser. Well, I don't know if it's Weiser or Weiser. So I try and read as much as I can that people have written about their experiences, not just flying F-18s, but just flying in general. I read the Chuck Yeager biography. As I say, I've just read as much as I can to try and just to hopefully absorb some sort of information that will allow me to at least feel like, oh, this seems like it might be right. But then, of course, the big test will be when I start giving things to test to the people who, as I say, have joined my Discord or just demos in general and just get feedback. Because as I say, when I play Ace Combat to me feels very arcadey. I mean,
Right. Ace Combat, I always think of it as that line of like it's arcadey in the day, but it wants to make people feel like it's real.
exactly. And then when I play Microsoft Flight Simulator or DCS, that almost feels, I'm going to say something that's ridiculous. I'm going to say it almost feels too real. Like it's so punishing. It's like, well, this isn't fun anymore because now I've got to understand the aerodynamics, the weather, the everything about this aircraft. So for me, I'm trying to sort of find that middle ground where it is as accessible as Ace Combat, but it does have a bit more of the depth towards the DCSs and the Microsoft Flight Simulators. So that, I mean, hopefully I can do it. When I sort of test what I'm working on and I'm flying around, I must admit, and to me this is always one of those sort of good signs, is I do end up playing it rather than testing. And you've been doing it for 20 minutes, like, oh yeah, I better get back to the work I'm supposed to be doing. So I always think that's a good sign. But obviously, yeah, I'm very aware that if it's just my opinion, so I need to be keeping an open mind and saying, well, yeah, but other people might say, you know what, this doesn't feel right, or yeah, get other people's input.
I do agree. That's usually a great sign, especially like a game like this where I'm assuming, especially when you're messing around with it. It's like open, just go flying, like that's a good sign being like, oh, I made something that like I at least like to play. I'm kind
Exactly.
of curious when you're going through, as you said, you were going on playing it or kind of messing around, kind of. Do you have a favorite like you grab an aircraft and just fly certain places, or kind of what's kind of your like MO of like if I just said here's your cockpit, go in this game, kind of what do you kind of like doing to like either test systems or kind of just get your like everything warmed up?
Yes, I have a favorite aircraft. Far and away, I've always been a fan of the F-15. I think the F-15 is just a beautiful aircraft, and obviously the fact that it has like a perfect record is it doesn't hurt. Um, but what would I do? I mean, I think so if I pick up and play any flight sim, whether it's arcadey or realistic, I just immediately sort of throw the aircraft around and see how it handles, how it reacts, just to get an idea of what they've gone for in terms of the flight model. So, for example, as you can imagine, I've bought loads of flight sims on Steam to get an idea of what's out there. And there's a game called X Plane, and I remember playing that, and some of the handling, it didn't make sense to me. I'm not saying it was wrong because obviously I'm no expert in this, but it didn't seem intuitive. So for me, that's the sort of thing where I'm go, well, I won't do that because even if that is physically accurate, it's not what I expected to happen as a game player. So that's the sort of thing that I will be wary of. But to answer your question, I think the perfect sort of game sort of task that I would want to do is I would want to do a trench run. So whether it's the sort of the Top Gun Maverick, the Star Wars, just flying low, flying fast, staying below radar type thing. That would be my favorite.
Oh, that sounds that's always a fun time, especially like I always think when games kind of pull off that type of stuff really well. It's a very fun scene. I could see how that's like a can I do it? Can I pull it off type thing. Um, but yeah, the game obviously as we're talked here is Supersonic Fight. You are Red Chain Games. Um, is there anything else we should be sending people else you to go currently wish list on Steam? I know we will make sure people have links to your website, your Discord, all that fun stuff. Is there any other spot that people should be checking out both this work as it comes out or anything else?
I think yeah, if people are interested, then do please join the Discord because I'm on there, pretty much every day, and I try and do a weekly update, where I just talk about what I've been doing for the week. And unfortunately, it's been a bit boring recently because it's been clouds, clouds, clouds. But yeah, no, the Discord is if you're interested and you want to follow along and you want to even maybe throw in your ideas of what could be fun to play, then feel free to join.
Perfect. I guess final thing too. So obviously currently you can wish list on Steam. Is there any sort of like timeline of you expected to launch or get into early access, any of that fun stuff over the next couple months or year?
Well, so this is where my marketing team will be listening intently, going, "Oh yeah, do tell." Um, See, I'm very lucky that because of the stuff I've been doing for the sort of the past 20 years, I am in a position where I can. It's going to sound very silly, but I can literally take as long as I want because there is no pressure. Not that that means I'm just going to take my time because obviously I want to work on other things as well. But no, so right now, I hope by the end of this year to have a demo in the hands of a select few so I can get their feedback on the flight model and just sort of the technical elements, such as as I say, the clouds, the weather, the terrain, and so on. And then hopefully sometime next year, I will do a demo which will include some sort some element of the story mission, and hopefully get that out to the general public and get feedback on that. Um, for the actual release of the game, so um, in the past, I have released a game on Steam using early access, and based on what happened with early access with me, and based on what I read of other people, I think I've kind of moved away from that idea. I think mainly because of the whole, you don't get to have that sort of that big release date because it's kind of that sort of that slow trickle. So I think I will go for a main release, which means for that I need to have my full story in there. I want to have there'll be network play in there with at least one or two modes, so deathmatch, team deathmatch, protect the VIP, that sort of thing. But I also, again, this is where I could literally spend the rest of my life just adding and adding and adding to this game. I mean, you're a developer, you know that. But I want to add a few sort of arcade modes. So, for example, here's the
Oh,
thing.
this is gonna be the yeah, the endless loop of you could work forever.
Exactly right. Yeah, yeah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So I would love to add a little arcade mode, which is kind of a homage to. I don't know if you're familiar with a Sega game called Thunderblade. This was back in the 90s. It was on the Mega Drive. It might have been on the Master System and the Mega Drive actually. But it was basically you got to fly a helicopter that was very blatantly supposed to be Blue Thunder, the TV helicopter. And you could fly and you could fly into the screen or you could fly top down and you flew through a city. Well, I happen to have, well, I'm building a San Francisco, which has skyscrapers, and I will be having at least one helicopter in the game. And there's a part of me that says, I have got to do an arcade mode, which is basically my homage to Thunderblade. So you get to fly through the skyscrapers and take on some sort of enemy. So I mean, I've got all these silly, not silly. I mean, they're good ideas. They're just all these things that could potentially take so much of my time. But I do have kind of a reputation. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but so I made a game. We made a game. Dean and I made a game called Boxed In that we released on PlayStation, PSVR, and the game was a very simple 3D puzzle game. And we got sort of noticed by a very big group called PSVR Without Parole. You might have heard of them on YouTube, and they've got their Discord and so on.
No, them I've definitely heard of.
Okay, and they were very kind. They reviewed the game, and one of the guys who reviewed it even said, "I was quite surprised. I thought it was going to be trash." And I just thought this was brilliant because I then decided I was going to put something in the game in reference to that. But I thought, well, I can't just sort of put a random poster in the startup room that has this on there because a lot of people won't have a clue what's going on. So I ended up adding a secret tropical island to the game that you couldn't access unless you knew how to get to it. And on the tropical island, there was a shed, and on the side of the shed was a poster with an image of the poster of the game, but with an image of the guy AJ that had said this. And it was a quote attributed to him saying, I was quite surprised. I thought it was going to be trash. And then because I did this, and then I thought, well, I've got this tropical island, I've got this sort of little hidden Easter egg in the game. I should do something. So I ended up spending a couple of weeks, and I added a pilot wings type game where you pick up a jetpack and you have to fly through rings as fast as you can. And this, I was just having so much fun because I could again, it was one of those where I can literally do anything. No one's telling me I can't, and which is probably a bad thing, as my wife would tell you. And I just kept adding stuff. And then there's one guy on Discord. He said, "Oh my goodness, you're just adding stuff. Well, then I want a medieval castle." And you can guess what I did next.
I did a medieval castle. I would assume was the
I did
natural.
indeed. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So yeah, so I do have a bit of a reputation for perhaps getting off the straight and narrow and doing stuff that perhaps isn't the most important, but at the same time, I have so much fun doing it, and yeah. That's so to answer to what the point I'm making is, I do want to add those sort of fun elements to the game. I mean, the game has to be fun. It's not a serious, simulator. It's not one where you have to study the manual. The story don't. I mean, I hope the story is good though. It's not a silly throwaway story. I've tried to write a decent story. So yeah, hopefully I can cover all bases.
Perfect. Again, the game is Supersonic Fight. You are Red Chain Games. You go wishlist it right now. Go join the Discord. Go check out the active development. Again, I want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to talk to me. I'm excited to kind of see how this all works out and kind of seeing what the game kind of looks like now in the next 6 months, year or so. So again, best of luck as you're working on development of the game and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.